Welcome to the Catholic Sphere. Each week we have a different host and a different focus as we tackle topics important to Catholics around the globe. I'm your host this week, Debbie Cowden, and in today's episode we'll be discussing how storytelling helps parents provide the building blocks of faith for their families. My panelists today are all moms and all authors of children's books. Katie Warner, author of One Holy Marriage, the story of Louis and Zélie Martin, and Jack Giorgio, future priest, is joining from Georgia. Adelie Hude is known for Light of Heaven, a children's book of saints, and the illustrator of Our Lady of Sorrows, Devotion to Mary's 7 Sorrows for Children, and she's from Washington State. Finally, Mary O'Neill from South Carolina, along with her husband Kevin, wrote The Catechism of the Seven Sacraments, the Holy Mass, on earth as it is in heaven, and the Pocket Guide to the Stations of the Cross. All right, together these ladies have written and illustrated over 24 children's books, many of which you can find at EWTN Religious Catalog. It's EWTNRC.com. I am eager, honestly, to dive in and to hear your words of wisdom. So Katie, we'll start with you. First of all, how did you get into writing children's books?
You know, before I fell in love with writing children's books, I fell in love with reading children's books. When I had my first son, I started checking out classic children's books from the library. And as I had more kids, I checked out even more books and I grew our home library. We were reading literally hundreds of picture books every year, and it was so much fun. So my passion for children's books really continued to grow. And I happened to have a dear friend who shared a deep love for good children's literature. Meg Whalen, our First Faith Treasury director, art director, and illustrator, and I went to graduate school together, and we were both studying theology at the Augustine Institute, but she was also simultaneously in art school, and I would admire all of her artwork and illustrations that she'd bring to class and show me. And then years later, she and I were sitting on her playroom floor with our children in Florida while the children played, and we started daydreaming about bringing fun and whimsy and pleasure to Catholic children's literature while retaining solid catechesis and authentic beauty in each book. And then shortly after that, we started our children's book line called First Faith Treasury. And this year, we're actually releasing our 17th and 18th titles. So it's been such an incredible adventure. We've been able to make the books that we wish that our children had, and then to share them with thousands of others. Books that we had hoped would be just as exciting to grab off the shelf as their best-selling secular counterparts. And then it happened. So we're just constantly reminded in our work of what a gift it is that the creator and God of the whole universe has entrusted us, mothers and fathers, grandparents and godparents, teachers and relatives, with his little souls, the greatest in his kingdom, as the Gospel of Matthew teaches us. We know that children's books have such an incredible and unique capacity to impart goodness, truth, and beauty through story. And that story comes in both word and art in this truly delightful little package that we call a picture book. Using that tool, you get to plant these seeds of faith and have amazing discussions and create tangible memories and connections with your children through the joy of reading and sharing your stories and your faith together.
And I look forward to hearing more about what goes on in your mind and your heart as you write these books and as you work with illustrators to bring those dreams to life. It's such a beautiful, creative process for me to observe. And Adelie, before illustrating children's books, you were making different kinds of art. So what prompted the shift?
Yeah, thank you so much, Debbie. Yes, I started apprenticing to a ceramist when I was 15, and I learned how to make very intricate ceramic horses to sculpt and mold and cast. And when I was in college, I started my own business, worked at that for 15 years, making horses for collectors. And it was initially exciting and fulfilling, but gradually, especially after I got married, I dove more deeper into my faith. And whereas I couldn't keep up with the demand for the horses, it was less fulfilling for me. And I was being called to do something different. Late 2013, I entered a painting contest called the Apocalypse Prize, and I hadn't painted in years. I didn't win the contest, but it just sparked a fire, and I said, "Ooh, I think this is what I meant to be doing." So eventually, I talked to my husband and said, "Hey, do you mind if I scrap everything I'm doing now, start over, and dedicate my talents to God?" And he was 100% on board with that. I had no idea what I was doing. I made a few paintings and greeting cards and brought them to the Catholic Answers Conference in 2016, and eventually thought up an idea for a coloring book that sent to different publishers. And the very last one to get back to me was OSV, and that became the Light of Heaven coloring book. And they also, which is beyond my wildest expectations, said, "Hey, how about we do a picture book version too?" So I got to do both a coloring book and a picture book, and it was beautiful. And from then on, you know, it just the ball kept rolling, and I got more projects to work on and did a couple more of my own, and I'm so very blessed and grateful.
And the rest is history, as they say. How wonderful to have the support of your husband, too, because it's really the marriage that makes it work. And Mary, you and Kevin have quite the story of how you got into writing children's books. So tell us all about that.
I'll try to fast forward because it was really a series of events that happened over the course of several years. But I think the main thing is that we didn't set out to be authors. Out of really, like many things, it was out of necessity, which is the mother of all invention, that it all came about. Towards the beginning of our marriage, I had prayed that Kevin would be the spiritual head of our family and lead our family. And shortly after this prayer, unfortunately, he was in a serious car accident. It was head on, and he became bedbound, and he was unable to walk actually for several months. And it wasn't exactly the answer that I was looking for to my prayer, but I know that God had bigger plans. And shortly after this, we met some beautiful new friends. They were unfortunately fallen away Catholics who were evangelical Christians, and they were actually trying to convert us away from Catholicism. And it was through these conversations that we were having with them that we really started studying our faith and coming up with these, defending our faith and coming up with these answers and these beautiful answers. And throughout that process, Kevin actually developed a talk that he had given for several years about the sacraments. And he would go on these retreats for men and give these talks. And oftentimes afterwards, people would say, "You should write a book." And he very humbly would say, "No, you should just read the books I've read." Um, but we knew that, he just kept thinking. And it came to a pivotal moment with our 9-year-old son. He approached Kevin and he was asking some questions about a book that he had been reading. And he kept saying, "Is this really in the Bible? Is this really in the Bible?" And Kevin would give him the apologetics answers. And around the third, "Is this really in the Bible?" I said, "Hey, buddy, bring me whatever it is that you're reading." And I couldn't believe it when he brought me a book that was illustrated with Lego images. And unbeknownst to us, we thought it was just a benign Christian children's Bible. But unfortunately, it was written by a transgender atheist, and it had serious problems with it. It was blasphemous, and it was really a tool that was being used to sow these seeds of of doubt and things into children. And so God uses everything for his glory. And our son, he continued to persist, which was very out of character for him. But he approached us again and said, "Can I just like blacken out the bad parts? Can we just still use it if we cut it out?" And my husband said, "You know what, buddy, seeing the draw that this book had on him, and it was continuously pulling him in because he was so interested in it." My husband said, "You know what, buddy, we'll make one." And we did. So from there, my husband wrote down his talk on the sacraments, and we diligently worked for about 2 years to illustrate it with our kids with these beautiful, vivid images made with Legos. And God provided a total path from a private publisher to being picked up by Sophia Institute Press. And it was just, through our yes, I guess, that God worked. And it was through our search for faith and our defending our faith, and then wanting to bring that faith to our children. that really just helped us, jump into this arena that we don't belong in, I honestly feel. So.
And that makes you all the more equipped. Your humility and your recognition that this is something that we had to do to protect our children's souls. And I have so much admiration for you, Mary, because of your willingness to say yes to something that you were adamant about not wanting to do at all. And the same for Kevin as well. Katie, let's talk more about, more broadly, about how storytelling is foundational for children learning about the faith. So from the tiniest of toddlers all the way up through those teenage years, what are some of the elements of storytelling that are the most impactful?
Right. I like to say that you'll know a good story by its fruits. So, the first thing for me that comes to mind is that I'm always amazed at all of the incredible, thought provoking questions and discussions that come from my children during and after reading good stories. So, children are naturally inclined to uncover these hidden gems of truth and goodness and beauty in the stories they read. And then from this comes this natural faith filled learning culture in the home based on living books. If you can have these rich catechetical discussions based on the children's books that you're reading, even if they themselves aren't preachy, because a good story doesn't need to be preachy, right? A good story will really teach for itself, then you know you've got a good book. In addition to a good story packed with these gems of the transcendentals and rife with opportunities to ponder and discuss and wonder about the things of God, we also want books that inspire our children to grow in faith, to pursue virtue, to dream of becoming the saints that God made them to be. So we, in our children's book line, we have books that focus on vocations. And there is nothing better than hearing a child tell me after reading Sister Claire Gets Ready for Prayer that they want to be a nun, or saying that they want to be a priest because of our book, Jack Giorgio, Future Priest, or become a saint because of Lily Lolek. Of course, this isn't to say that all of these children will end up becoming nuns and priests, but hopefully they all become saints. It's the story that inspired them to dream of higher things. And that really is the gift. That's the Holy Spirit working behind the scenes. A good story will also be not just a rote book, but really an experience. So we also have several titles that involve the children interacting with the story. So the reader gets to be a part of the story, like blowing out candles that the altar servers are holding, or helping Father Ben select which chasuble to wear for the current liturgical season, or praying aloud with Sister Claire and her fellow nuns at her cloistered monastery. Or learning how to sit in silence. One of our books teaches about Elijah and the still small voice, and how we can spend time in that sacred silence every day to listen for God's voice. These tactile, audible, and relationally impactful ways of learning really stick with children in such a unique and irreplaceable way. And then finally, look for that beautiful artwork that lifts your hearts and minds to God too. I love what Mary was saying about how they got into the Lego, aspect of artwork, because books will also inspire children to play. So when you're reading a good book, you'll find that your child might even be play acting the main character in the story. And so when you see all of those little glimmers, then you know that you're in the middle of some good children's literature.
Amen. And there have been studies that show that play is work for children, and play is how they process what they see going on around them. That's why, at EWTN Religious Catalog, we also have a wooden children's play mass set where young children can learn about the mass and engage with what they see in the mass. And we also have Lego sets that are specifically designed for children learning more about the mass and confession. So you can go to ewtnrc.com and check those out for your children, grandchildren, godchildren. But another thing that Katie had mentioned was the importance of the illustration. So Adelie, how do these illustrations and these beautiful pictures in this artwork, how do they guide readers through the story, especially those littlest of readers?
Well, there's only one book that I've done that has really been more a guiding. I guess I can say that my first book, Light of Heaven, that I did, it it was more presenting what a saint could have looked like, or did, depending on if I had photo references, and to kind of spark their imaginations, to help them envision, who this person was. The book that I did that most guided people through a story would be the book Sanctus, Sanctus, Sanctus that I came out with a couple of years ago. It's a Latin missal for children, and it goes through the older mass and shows them not only how it progresses from the entrance and the prayers, but also it gives glimpses of heaven, and it kind of it brings into the child's imagination, like, oh, this is what it could look like, heaven meeting earth here. This is how it culminates at the consecration, and all heaven breaks loose. Things that they can imagine when they're at mass to sort of lead their own imaginations.
It's filling their hearts and their minds with good things. And these books have such a powerful impact to let them see what's on the other side of the veil at the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass. Or even with Jack Giorgio, Katie Warner's book, that little boys can picture themselves being priests one day, that's something that's within the realm of possibility. And I think that is so beautiful. And Mary, I'd love to know, what is the impact that you have seen when you're using something as iconic and as popular as those Lego bricks and the figurines to tell the story, so to speak, of our Catholic faith?
Well, if one thing is true in evangelization, I would say that you don't always get to see the fruits of the seeds that you plant. So I do say it with all sincerity that we've really been blessed, our family, and humbled by all of the different signal graces that we've received, and incredible feedback from families through emails and tags and tweets in this day and age. And even in-person conversations at conferences and such, that that the Legos have really, drawn their children in a way that is interesting to them, and that they don't have to like push their kids onto these books. The kids bring them to them and say, "Hey, can we read another chapter?" They often find them, tucked under their pillow or with a flashlight, and it's like they were supposed to be sleeping, but how can you punish them for, continuing reading a religious book? And just because the things that we teach in there are profound. Kevin often likes to say that just because it's profound, it doesn't mean that it's complicated. And so we love using the Legos to really bring it to the children's level. And even the parents, have commented that they just love the images. And our priest, even when he was helping us with revisions, he was, "Hey, Father, what's taking so long?" And he said, "I'm just engrossed in looking at these images. They're so fun." And um, it's amazing. We're really blessed to have this tool that we use in our book, which is typology. So it's the Old Testament teachings being fulfilled in Christ in the New Testament. And to be able to pair those teachings side by side with these Lego images, it really has just enabled the truths of the faith to be enlivened for these children and engage them, young and old alike. We've received like different feedback from people, and one thing that sticks out, one mom said, even for her kids who can't read, the pictures alone evangelize and educate them. And it's really important to note that when we write our books, they all have the imprimatur from the bishop, and we couldn't receive that imprimatur even until all of the pictures have been put in, because even the pictures have the imprimatur. And just, it's amazing that, we could pair these images that are so fun and contemporary to these centuries old teachings that have been passed on, for since the beginning of time. And I just love that it's, interesting to children and compelling, and that they can just, be involved in the learning process. They can sit down and play with the Legos with their families and refer to the different things that they're learning in the images. And I love that throughout the ages, the church has even used images to always teach. Even when people were illiterate, they used stained glass windows, which are really just colorful blocks put together. They used icons, they've used statues, and our family uses Legos.
And it's obviously proven to be very, very effective for parishes, for teachers, and for parents as well. Katie, you point out that Catholic children's books even have the potential to teach parents. And how is that so?
Yeah, so a good story will impact readers of any age. So when I'm writing my picture books, I'm always hesitant to put an age range on it. My publisher will probably tell you, oh, she hates when when we ask her for an age range. Because if we as children's authors are looking to tell or to share a good, true, and beautiful story, it will be one that can capture the hearts and imaginations of readers of any age. So this concept is really modeled after Christ, whose messages weren't so much aimed at a certain age, but rather intended for those who had open hearts and ears to hear. We also know that a really great story doesn't water anything down, even for children, because our children have such a great capacity for knowing God and his truths. I mean, God himself placed that capacity in their minds and hearts. But we also notice that when we're telling a story that is aimed at children, there are lessons imparted through the story that are applicable and hopefully memorable and thought provoking for all. Years ago, I had a conversation with my spiritual director that inspired my children's book, Lily Lolek, Future Saint, a rhyming story about a very spirited young girl and her bold dreams to become a saint, but she had a problem. She's not as courageous as Saint Joan of Arc or as smart as Saint Thomas Aquinas. And with the help of a priest who joins her family for dinner one night, she comes to discover that she has to be precisely the kind of saint that God made her to be, which will look different than some of the saints that she studies and admires so much. But what she can do is give God her entire heart and let him take her on an adventure of knowing and loving and serving him in a way that only she can. So that's a lesson that all of us can relate to, right? I mean, trying to uncover God's will for us, avoiding comparisons, and so on. We also have a picture book that you mentioned at the top of the show called One Holy Marriage, which tells the story of Saints Louis and Zélie Martin. And talk about a book that can teach parents. I mean, we have this incredible example of the joys and also the serious trials that this saint couple went through. This ordinary couple living an ordinary life that was filled with extraordinary love. But besides the stories themselves, teaching us adults along with our children, we really can't ignore the lessons that we learn from our children while reading and discussing. I mentioned before, there's just been so many incredible insights that I've gained from my kids by talking with them about a good story. Again, I just see this as such a nod to God's amazing gifts and blessings that he bestows on the littlest in his kingdom.
And also the gifts that he has given to authors like you, Katie, who are bringing these stories to life for our children, for our families, and also Mary and Adelie as well. And I'm really curious to know, Adelie, how has being a mom impacted your approach to being a Catholic illustrator?
Well, it has definitely made me a much more efficient worker, a
Relatable.
quicker
I can
worker.
relate.
Yes, I mean, before I had kids, I had no idea um, just how I could, you know, squeeze more drops out of my day, but I have because I want to be wife and mom first, of course, and also fulfill this call that God has given me. So there have been times I've gotten up really early to work on projects, 4 a.m. um, or I would squeeze in things during nap time. My son being a little bit older, uh, when I was feeding uh, the newborn we adopted last year, he'd be happily playing, and I realized I can hold a bottle and draw on my tablet at the same time. So I was able to get a little bit done here and there, and it's been a blessing.
Yeah, you learn to juggle your time or juggle all the tasks, stack your time. I was just talking with our producer about the picture that you shared before the show that I think that should go on note cards or a prayer card with the saint quote from Saint Gianna or Saint Zélie. It just beautifully encapsulates the mission of a mother who wants so badly to share the faith with her children and to say yes to God to accomplish his will through her family life and through her gifts and her talents. And I've seen that so beautifully illustrated, if you will, in the lives of you women. Mary, our show is winding down already, and I can't believe it, but I have one more question for you. One of the many things I love about the Building Blocks of Faith books is the fact that they do provide a very entertaining and engaging reading experience for children and their Lego-loving parents. But they also provide teachings that are totally faithful to the Catholic Church. And I want to know, why is it so important for Catholic authors and publishers to get both of those objectives right?
It is extremely important. I feel like if we create something that is entertaining, but it's void of faithful content, it's wasted. And if we create something that's faithful, but it lacks the ability to engage people, the children, the parents, then it's just a chore that no one's going to willingly undertake. So if we can strike the balance with the good, the true, the beautiful, it naturally draws people towards God. And we know that we cannot waver in our duty as parents and educators, as authors, as publishers, to dynamically engage children. We can't compromise the truth along the way. And that was one thing our family really fought hard for, is to make sure that we are transmitting the faith in a very faithful way. As parents, we're always trying to engage our children. And we're very happy that our series, because of the Lego hook, it really just pulls the children in. And like we saw with our own children, and we don't have to push them. We're just happy it keeps them engaged, and they can learn through the repetition as they continuously pick it up. And as they age and mature, they can mature in their faith as well, because we know that the faith is just so deep and wide and profound, and it hits us at different places throughout our lives. And that continual discussion with your parents and grandparents and godparents, it's just beautiful. And the way that the parents can just, pick up these books and engage their children, we just know that these discussions can be profound, and they are accessible. Let's not sell our children short. They can learn these beautiful teachings of our faith and make them their own.
Amen. And we want to remind our parents and our grandparents and godparents that you can get these faith-filled, faithful books at ewtnrc.com, as well as many, many other holy reminders that will help you and your family grow in God's love. And that's all the time that we have for today with our children's book authors, Katie Warner, Adelie Hude, and Mary O'Neill. Thank you so much for joining us. And I look forward to continuing this discussion with our beautiful authors on an upcoming episode of The Catholic Sphere. That's all the time that we have for today, but we'll see you next time right here on The Catholic Sphere.